y'all. Welcome to another episode of Soccer for Us. I am Bart and on this episode, we are talking about the 25 players assembling in Orlando, Florida for the 2024 USMNT January camp, lovingly known as Camp Cupcake. And a man who loves cupcakes and U.S. soccer is joining me tonight. That's Thomas, a.k.a. U.S. Keeper. I actually don't know if you love cupcakes. I'm assuming you do.
Oh, I mean, cupcakes are amazing. I mean, it's
You don't strike me as someone who eat cake or
they're
cupcake.
the portion control built in, right? So that's a kind of, this is a little bit of
Absolutely.
a portion control when we look at the roster, right? We've got
Absolutely.
a lack of options, I guess, in some respects, and
Definitely a portioned, controlled roster. Obviously, we don't get the heavy hitters in this camp because they're, doing the whole soccer thing. They're playing professionally over in Europe. Some of them playing currently. Italy did not really take a break over the holidays. England obviously doesn't. Um, and so we're stuck with, as people surely are aware, a roster that is most of the time, and especially in this camp, domestic based, or players who are not currently playing for their club team. And that could just be because the club is in a pause for their season, or if you're Serginho Dest last year and just your club didn't want you to play soccer for them, that was a weird situation. But yeah, all MLS players in this particular camp, if I'm reading correctly. Yeah. Making sure I didn't miss one. And I think to set the tone, first off, that just is, you're going to be disappointed, right? I think everyone gets disappointed when an MLS players gets called in because, there's this prevailing thought that no MLS player is ever good enough to play on the U.S. men's national team. But the names are not that big of names. And I think that's why a lot of people get dejected almost every single year when a roster like this for the January camp comes out. But I do want to go back to, since this is the first Camp Cupcake of Greg's second cycle, I want to go back to the first Camp Cupcake he ever had, and just kind of highlight some of the players that existed. Um, the defenders were actually interesting. Jeremy Abubase and Christian Ramirez were part of that. And unfortunately, neither of them really stuck with the national team. But we did have Giassi Zardes, who at that point had 40 caps and got a ton more under Greg. The Abubase and Ramirez those were two guys that I wish somehow had found a way to stay in the national team, because I think they're better than what Giassi Zardes gave us, especially in this last cycle.
yeah, it's a blessing in disguise. You have a small opportunity to make an impression with them, in this camp, and we've seen players be able to make that impression and either be, pulled into, the regular squads, or you have players that just fall off completely because of just this camp. And so I think there's too much weight put on that on both sides, I think. And so I think
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge, right? I think, the player pool is a lot when you look at domestically, and I think you want to promote the MLS in this camp because that's, that opportunity. But again, I think as a manager, you have to be very clear with your
Mm-hmm.
team and say, look, this is the expectation here, right? Like there's players in here that I haven't seen that I think are maybe a little premature, but I think that's fine for this camp. And I just hope that's being communicated to the players, because in the past,
Yes.
I don't get the sense that it has been, directly communicated with them, what that expectation is.
I got the feeling, especially, I think the problem with this 2019 roster, I mean, it included like Michael Bradley, right? Greg Garza. And then you also see in this 2019 camp, Acosta, Ariola, Leggett, Roldan get called in. Zimmerman gets called in. Canna McKenzie, Long, Trusty. Like, there's a lot of players who became contributors, but I think you and I agree that they kind of had a lot of preference because they had this extra time in this Camp Cupcake window, which, by the way, is about 2 weeks long. So you do get a lot of time with Greg just in training. And that kind of gave them an edge over some players who were just clearly more talented, but didn't have the same knowledge of the system that Greg loves to talk about, or just the program knowledge as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's spot on with that. When you look at that, it's a longer camp than we see. I like the longer camps. I think it gives you a better opportunity to look at these players, see them, in develop through the camp, whatever the camp objective is, give them an
Hmm.
opportunity to succeed, as opposed to, hey, we've got a goal here, right? We've got 2 World Cup qualifiers. That's what those camps aren't for, that, right? Because those camps are really designed to say, hey,
Absolutely.
let's figure it out. Let's come out with a plan to beat these 2 teams and get our World Cup qualifying wins. These here, they should be a little bit more loose. They should be a little bit more free. And I know in the past, I believe that Greg has let players go at some of these camps,
Yeah.
for performance purposes, I guess. They've thrown some of that random jargon out there about not something in general. I can't remember. There was one player that sticks out. I can't remember who it was. There's one of
Acosta
the
had an issue for one camp. I forget
maybe
which camp
that's
it
maybe
was, but
that's
he
who it
had,
was.
I think it may have been 2019, but he definitely had one of those issues. I'm trying to think who the other one was, but yeah, there was definitely Acosta had an issue like that.
Yeah, so Greg has to figure out that the formula on that, and just
You did mention the 2020 camp though as one that kind of stuck out to you as maybe not quite the ideal, but like almost an ideal usage of this particular January camp, which is as we've talked about, longer out of season, and fits a lot of players who by nature aren't stars on the global scale.
yeah, and the 2021 was, again, I think the 2020 you look at that camp and you say, well, who did he bring in? He brought in a few players, Christian Kappas, who, you know, it's one of those players I see him, playing every week, and it's like, well, why isn't this guy getting a chance,
Why
right?
isn't he getting a look?
Right. I mean, and this is 2020, I'm talking about,
Yeah.
and so that was, it's 4 years ago, 5 years, yeah, 4 years ago. So, like, to me, like, he's what's missing, like, with that. And they brought, Ilana's in there, and they had, Matt Turner on that roster, and
Yeah.
Vines and Mark McKenzie. So, like, that roster there, like, some of those players have either been up and comer players or players you'd want to see in these rosters. And it's obviously easy to look back and say, well, that was a great roster. But I think you look at it and say, okay, you were able to pull a few players from Europe, which last year we saw 8 players, which I think was awesome, come over, and kind of mix them in a little bit. Maybe they weren't playing with a lot with their club. Maybe they have an opportunity to, you know, build some confidence, go back to the team. They're not playing, so it's no real loss for the team. I was hoping we would see possible players fall into that. Someone like Ethan Horvath. Why not? Right? He's not playing right now. Why not bring him over to the squad? In terms of, if you're bringing in some of these other leaders, why not him? Why not Winder? He a center back position
Yep.
on this squad is pretty weak. Why not bring him in? He's not really playing with his club, right? So you look at those things and you say, getting, again, they have to be released. Who knows? U.S. Soccer isn't very open about those conversations. At least consistently are open with those conversations. But I think that's the sort of thing we look at.
Yeah.
Fans say, okay, that get a little bit of excitement here. Look, it's January. I overhype myself with this. The match is usually terrible. So but I think fans want something to look forward to. And when you're able to pull in a few European players that are on the fringe with their clubs, and people want to take a look at, I think
Yeah.
gives a little more juice going for it.
Something that Greg talked about multiple times, both in the kind of on-air press conference when the names were released, and then also in his normal like roster release press conference that happened after that, was I think a little bit managing expectations and talking about getting guys in who had great MLS seasons and kind of worked their way into a call up. Also managing the expectation that a lot of these players are U23 eligible, meaning they could go to the Olympics. And by a lot, it's about half. But also acknowledging that there's some players who they obviously just need to have a wider pool as we look forward to Nations League in March and Copa America in the summer. Now, I don't see any players specifically on this roster who I think are truly competing for a Nations League and Copa America spot outside of like Miles Robinson, maybe Drake Callender. But though it felt more like he was really just saying, hey, these guys are here because they showed out well in MLS and it's a good time to see what they can do in camp. I'm hoping that is the kind of level that he's at. It's just good job. You had a good MLS season. Let's see maybe how that translates to the international game. My pause is oftentimes, and this is where this camp cupcake, the good and the bad, oftentimes the bad comes, as we said. These players get in front of Greg. He likes what he sees because a lot of MLS players can be very coachable. And he values that and values the experience they have just in camp over, again, actual talent. And so I just hope that Greg himself is putting those kind of ceilings on these players.
Yeah, and the expectations of that, it's, again, when you're looking at it in this pool, they may stand out, right? Because they're playing with, similar level talent. I mean, they're all,
Right.
from the MLS this
Which
year.
isn't a bad thing, to be clear. Like,
No,
it's not
I think it's fine.
great.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think, but again, when you start, again, about half the roster I don't have a problem with in terms of, who it is, the age. I mean, there's obviously players I would have liked to have seen, but you look at, Greg does tend to fall in love with that. When you have 2 weeks, you're like, oh, you see something. Like sometimes you're too close to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be able to take a step back. So I'm hoping, some of his, his new assistant is going to be able to help maybe, clear the fog from his glasses and say, hey, you saw this, but did you really see this? Like, type of thing. And so hopefully that's the case. I think this camp does need to be repurposed, every year based on what's going on. There's an Olympics this year. I think there could have been more value to use the other half of the roster to maybe,
Yes,
do those things. So you have to, I think, to kind of be creative with it. I don't want it to go away selfishly because it's nice to have it. It's good to get a good look at players and, give players an opportunity to be seen too that maybe need a
absolutely.
transfer. So I think that's, that's a plus and a reason to keep it. But you've got to repurpose it, I think, every year based on, what's on the, calendar.
Well, we've talked about it, so let's actually talk about it. The roster, the 25 players that'll be part of this camp. Now, I am first going to tell you their names, and then I'm going to go through and also say if they are Olympic eligible or not. Okay, let's start with the goalkeepers. So first off, Drake Callender with Inter Miami. No, not Olympic eligible. Roman Celentano with FC Cincinnati, not Olympic eligible. He had to have been born in 2001. He's about a year too old for that. Patrick Schulte from Columbus Crew, yes, Olympic eligible. Obviously, a MLS Cup winning goalkeeper. Personally, I think that's a great use of this camp, is to get Schulte, guys like that in here. Defenders, Miles Robinson, not Olympic eligible, but obviously a senior national team stalwart. Shaq Moore, not eligible. James Sands, just not eligible. DeJuan Jones, not eligible. John Tolkien, eligible. Caleb Wiley, eligible. Nathan Harriel, eligible. Ian Murphy, not eligible. Jackson Reagan, not eligible. And Nkosi Tafari, not eligible. A lot of not eligible defenders on this roster. And that, to me, is one of those, like, okay, so what's the point? And we'll talk about it a little bit, but I just feel like outside of Miles and Shaq, which I do understand why they're here, they're in that USMNT senior national team, player pool for definitely. So why not get them in camp to just get them some reps? I don't really understand some of the other names on here. Even DeJuan Jones, I should include DeJuan Jones in that as well. DeJuan, Miles, Shaq, like they're in that, like, yeah, they're part of the MLS or the US pool.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I think you have to have a little bit of that, to create a little bit of juice, create a little bit of experience, to have some leadership on the team. Like, I don't think you want a squad of, you know, 18 to 22-year-olds that have never been in camp before. You do need a little bit of leadership. That being said, you don't need a lot of it. And again, some of those players you mentioned have never been on the squad that are, 25, 26, 27-year-olds, right? So, like, to me, I think, well, again, it's all about who can get released and who's available. So I think that has to be considered in there along the way too. So, but to one thing to mention, while some of these players aren't eligible, there are three overaged positions available at the Olympics. Whether they use one or all three, I think it's an 18-man roster. That's where maybe some of those players might get that opportunity to to be on the squad. In general, generally you see a keeper, a striker, and then the other player. It's I'm not really sure, but those are keepers and strikers are kind of the two players that you see. I think one year, Brian McBride, I think he was in his 30s.
Yeah, I think he was in the 2008 World Cup. He was on
Yeah,
that team.
he was on that team. So I think that, and that was close to the end of his, national team career. So
Now, I will say that Greg addressed that basically in his press conference, and he didn't really have a firm answer, which I expected him to, but he didn't seem to indicate that they would even use the overage players, just because I think, to be quite honest, the U.S. has a wealth of U23 talent. That said, the midfield pool, I will say on this, the midfielders on this roster, most of them fit the Olympic eligibility criteria. The others that don't, I like the call up. So Aiden Morris is Olympic eligible, part of that MLS winning Columbus Crew team. Josh Atencio from Seattle, Olympic eligible. AZ Jackson from St. Louis City, Olympic eligible. Jack McGlynn, we've seen him with the U20s a lot. He's Olympic eligible. The two that aren't, Timothy Tillman from LA, he's 25, but I think it's good to see him here. And then Sean Zawadski from Columbus, again, a year too old, but a kind of a defensive midfielder. I don't mind bringing a guy like that in either. These midfielders, again, I think that this is a good group of midfielders.
yeah, I mean, there may have been a couple I would have liked to see, but I think all in all, I think it's a good group.
There's one or two snubs for sure. We'll talk about that, but I thought these were strong midfield candidates. And then the forwards, Cade Cowell, Olympic eligible. Esmir Vajakatarevich, I'm sorry, I butchered that name. He's Olympic eligible. He's only 18, the youngest guy in the squad. Bernard Kamungo, 22, he is Olympic eligible. Diego Luna, Olympic eligible. Duncan McGuire, the forward from Orlando City, Olympic eligible. And then Brian White from Vancouver, he is not Olympic eligible. I think there are probably some forwards other people would have liked to have seen, but I think these are okay.
Yeah, I think what Greg is giving a little, hey, good MLS season, come on in to camp type of reward for some of these players for sure. And again, while I like to see other players, I guess it's okay. I mean, in that respect, but again, that's why you have to kind of set the expectation of what each camp is, because if you're trying to do an Olympic thing, you kind of missed out a little bit on that.
Yeah, and again, I think we can talk about this kind of at the end when we summarize, but there does need to be some balance, obviously, of, oh yeah, you're a legitimate USMNT or you're an MLS. This is a camp for you to just get a little bit more practice. A balance of rewarding guys for good MLS seasons, and a balance of making sure you're trying to find the unearthed youth talent that is in MLS and other places. So I just I find it hard to get super upset about a roster like this because of all that. There's so many considerations. You mentioned we don't know who was allowed to come out and who wasn't. Maybe they didn't want to even join. I mean, it's not a FIFA window, so they don't have to if they don't want to. It could be a lot of reasons. I mean, I look at there are teams in MLS who are playing. There's a team in MLS, I should say, that is playing kind of an extended world tour of a preseason. So, not shocked that one of their players that I think we would have liked to have seen didn't come. But anyway, 17 of the 25 don't have a cap. A couple of those have been called in before, but 17 without a cap. 12 are Olympic eligible. I wish we would have tried to find where there are some of those like 23-year-olds fine, but like anyone above 25 who hasn't had a cap before, this is not an absolute, but I just don't understand the point of them being here. Is that fair to say?
I think it is, but I think we want to look back too at some of the Olympic players, or at least the Olympic qualifying players that played in the past, like a Jackson Ewell. Some of these players, like, they kind of hung around and they just were put on the roster because they were U23. It didn't mean they were the best player, even the best player available, right? Like, I think so that's where that balance is, right? Like you could say, well, they don't have any national team caps. Okay, well that's maybe okay. I mean, we've got a lot of young talent right now, and so maybe looking at that piece of it, because I don't want like a retread player that's kind of hanging on that just can't
Yep.
get through being on that Olympic roster. I want kind of like, hey, this is an exciting player. Like again, Aiden Morris, I'll use him as an example. Like he's an exciting player. We're seeing things from him that are positive. Let's put him there as opposed to like a Jackson Ewell who just says, well, I'm just hanging around. I get a call up to the senior team once in a while and maybe play a little bit. And so since I have that
Mm.
experience, well, maybe I'll just be put on the Olympic roster like that as an afterthought. And I don't like that. I want to
Yeah.
put the best squad on the field for that Olympics that they can conceivably do so they can actually, produce something.
Yeah. I mean, look, for me, I just struggle with an MLS player who's not a striker, by the way, um, who isn't producing or not. If you're over the age of 25 and you're in MLS, unless you are a league leader in your position, I don't really see your ability to impact the national team, right? And so I'm with you in this, like a Jackson Ewell type player, where once when he was under 23, that's great. Like he was getting starts for San Jose. He was, that's fine. This is a worthwhile investment. But after a while, you go, okay, well, he hasn't really helped the team. So what is he doing here? Is he just here because he knows how to shake Greg's hand? I mean, what's the value of bringing him in over any other human?
Yeah, and I think that's where we look at like the opportunity to see those. There's a lot, again, to your point, a lot of players on this squad that haven't been capped. I think that's a good opportunity to see if they're gonna if there's a fit. You know, this camp going forward, Olympics. Like you have to get a look at the pool at some point, and so yeah. So I mean, there's
Yeah.
some exciting players on this squad that I'm excited to see for sure.
There are a couple of guys that specifically are Olympic eligible. Actually, there's about five that aren't here that I think a lot of USMNT fans, especially on Twitter, um, were a little annoyed they're not here. First off is, and I think this is a easy explanation for me anyway, is Benja Kramaski, who is both eligible for the US and Argentina. Now, I don't think this camp would have had any real effect on him. He does have a cap for the national team, but like I said, Miami's going to have a very long preseason. Maybe he just doesn't want to come in right now. That's kind of my rationale. I don't know. Again, we didn't get this question asked, so Greg didn't talk to it. Another one could be, I think maybe Jalen Neal. I think we would have liked to seen him, but maybe he just wanted a break. I'm not entirely sure what's up with him. Um, Chris Brady, Brian Gutierrez, both from Chicago. Not sure why they weren't released. And then Obed Vargas is the other one that I think a lot of people wanted to see. Another of his Seattle teammates was released. He chose to not come, but dual eligible. So who knows? Any insight from any of those?
Yeah, I mean Neal's coming off an injury of last season, pretty much.
Mm,
I think he had one. I think it was the injury around the Gold Cup. So I'm not even sure he was been back since then. But if he has, it's been sporadic. So
yeah,
I don't know if he's still recovering from that. I don't know if he had surgery from that. There was some couple, you know, things I heard, but nothing confirmed. Kramaski, I think you probably hit it on the head on that one. I don't think he personally probably didn't see a huge benefit to coming into this camp in general. The two Chicago Fire players, I think. um, I don't know. Like those are ones I want to see. Like those are players I want to see. I feel the Chicago Fire relationship with U.S. Soccer right now isn't great. Similar to Atlanta United, probably what 3 or 4 years ago
yeah,
when they went release. A couple players to this camp. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Brady called into the March camps. They did a similar thing uh, with Atlanta players. Following that for our international camp. They brought in a
yeah,
few players. I think it was Bello and for sure, and then obviously Robinson. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of an issue there, relationship wise with the Chicago Fire. Again, they don't have to release them, but you think they might want to. Um, yeah, Omar Vargas, I don't understand that one. He's one that
yeah.
he's one that we've wanted to see, unless again there's an unknown injury that's preventing him. I think he's is a player that everyone wants to see.
Two more names that I think we worth mentioning. I think you and I both agree. Keaton Parks. I guess just the ship has sailed on him, and I'm completely clueless as to why we just have chosen to not look at him as any sort of midfield option for this team.
Yeah, that one. I mean, he's not Olympic eligible, but he's definitely.
Not. I'm still looking at him going.
No,
we
but
called other people in.
Yeah, I don't understand that one. It's just like Greg has his favorites. He has players that he just does not jive with. I mean, and Parks is one of them for whatever reason. So, and we're probably never going to know why. He just doesn't fit. So, that one bothers me because he's consistently performed for a very long time.
Yeah,
and I think his position is one, where he could, definitely provide some depth, or could have provided some depth. I mean, he's getting to the point where he's getting on the other side of it. So,
I think he fits to me in that James Sands category. I don't particularly see him close to anywhere near the depth chart at his position. So, is it a defensive midfielder? Is it more of a box to box midfielder? But he can play a couple positions, and he's technically sound, and he's smart enough to play in this system. And to me, he's close enough to the top 4 of the depth chart where once injuries start happening or whatever, he's got to be in that conversation, but he just hasn't had any sort of a look, and it's kind of frustrating to me.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that.
The other one that I think is still a head scratcher for many U.S. fans is Noel Buck. Not called in. I don't know if he would have wanted it. Who knows? He could have and turned it down. He clearly seems to think that England is the next place for him, even though I have zero faith that England will actually call him in for a real camp. I don't know. You're the New England fan. What's going on with Noel Buck, and why not?
Yeah, I don't know. No, he said some stuff last year. He definitely didn't help himself out. I would hope that Greg would not burn that bridge and keep that olive branch open, because you don't. I don't think he's going to have a great opportunity to play with England. Like, I just don't. And so it's one of those situations where different personalities need to be handled differently. So Greg has to figure out how to work with these personalities. And so he is a talent. He's young.
Yes.
He has some upside for sure. Like, and so that's where you don't want to lose that opportunity to get that player that, into camps and convince him that the U.S. is where he should be playing. And so that's where I think Greg has missed out on this. Like, this is the whole, like, control. It's a control thing. I mean, this is what drives me nuts about, that sort of thing. Like, he's young. He says stupid stuff. Okay. Like, it's going to happen. Like, you can't control it, in the small window of time you see these players, have these players. So figure it out, open the doors, open the conversation, and, and start, fixing the situation. Granted, he probably wouldn't have come into this camp anyway. If he's going to want to come to, the A squad camps, and that sort of thing, and maybe in March, you throw that opportunity out there. So, and who knows, maybe there's behind the scenes stuff we don't know going on too, right?
But I guess what I don't get, and this is first off, I think this I'm personally putting this more on Noel than Greg. I know that will piss a lot of people off because then I'm not blaming Greg for a problem. But I think he is preferring England. So to your point, like, he's not going to come into this Mickey Mouse Camp Cupcake type thing. However, if you're U.S. soccer, you're going, yeah, look, kid, like, this is a great camp to come in and prove yourself as part of our Olympic squad, which, by the way, we're playing in this summer. Like, do you want to play for the Olympics or not, and the Olympics with us or not? And so, I don't know. We don't know where things are, but it does seem to me like Buck at being a young kid, seeing the little, shiny toy that is England, probably seems to just be preferring them. I don't know.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting opportunity for Buck, and in terms of what where he could break into, right? He's at the right age for Olympic qualifying. He's talented. He probably would be released by club for the Revolution. And so when you look at that, if I'm a player, I'm going to say, hey, wow, this is an opportunity, because if you show well at the Olympics, right, then I think after that, because I think that's when these opportunities open up for players, right, after the
Absolutely.
Olympics, right, and after Copa America and the Euros and stuff, like the middle, that it's the kind of the line in between the cycle. It's the middle point, right? Okay, middle of the cycle is done. Believe it or not, now
Yep.
let's go and see, qualify for the World Cup. U.S. doesn't have to do that, but but has that chance, right? Like, because I don't think England's qualified for the Olympics. Well, they're
No,
hosting it, aren't they? Are they hosting it?
nope,
Who's
they
France?
are.
France. It's France. It's France.
Yeah.
I knew it was over in Europe. So I don't think England's
I don't
qualified,
think
right?
they've qualified at all. No, if I
Yeah.
remember correctly, I didn't see them on the list, but I
Because
also may
it's
not
only
have been
16
looking.
teams that qualify. So
Yes.
I think it's France, Spain.
Yeah, right now the qualified teams from UEFA are Spain, Israel, Ukraine, and then obviously
Okay.
France.
Right.
So, no, England not qualified. So again, here's a chance to play in a youth national team tournament that wouldn't would tie you to the U.S., but not close off any opportunity playing for England.
Right.
Um, but maybe that's again why he doesn't. I mean, he's not interested. I don't know. I don't know why.
Well,
But
I think that's the piece. I don't. I think he said in his statement that no one had communicated with him. No one
yeah,
had reached out to him. I said again, that to me, that is a fault of U.S. soccer, right? You've got a player pool of 1,000 players, right? It's a lot, but guess what? That's the time you have. You got to figure out: is it Matt Crocker that's doing that? Is it one of the assistants that doing
yep,
that? Is it Greg Balto? You can send a note, hey. Saw your match, great job, or whatever it was. Like, you've had a great last month. You can communicate with these players, no matter how it is, you have to, especially these ones that are dual nationals. I think a little bit, they might need a little bit more, you know, love, and they have done that with certain ones, but not others. And I think that's where they've maybe, sometimes missed the mark a little bit. And he got bitter. He said things. He's a young kid, so you gotta, figure that out. So, but again, ultimately, I don't think this is the camp for him, unless you're bringing a full, you know, U23 World Cup type, your best
yep,
players in the MLS, which, isn't the case.
yeah. We really don't know. And again, he wasn't asked about it. Greg was not asked about it, so we're not going to get information. Let's look at some positives though. Talk about some good players that have been brought in that we're excited to see. Obviously, as an Atlanta United fan, super happy Caleb Wiley is here and he's going to get another shot at a senior national team camp. And I definitely see him on the roster going to France in the summer. Um, Anyone else you really feel like this was a good call up for them?
I mean, I like Jack McGlynn. I want to see more of him. He's definitely, he's 20 years old, I think. Like, he's a player that I want to
Mm-hmm.
see a little bit more of. Again, I think he falls into that category of Olympic players. Like, no, go to the Olympics, you know, get an opportunity to be part of the national team heading into a World Cup in the last 2 years. Right? I think he's one of those players. I think he's probably getting close to maybe a move out elsewhere, based on his age and what we've seen him from a performance perspective. So, I'm excited to see him, for sure.
Also, need to mention Diego Luna. I think a lot of people are excited to see him. Um, he has been an electric player. I think he has struggled to find a way to translate his flash and sauce and swagger to producing real things as a professional soccer player. Feel like he figured that out at the end of the season with RSL.
Yeah, he's exciting to see. I mean, he's another one that, again, falls into that 20-year-old window. Has that opportunity, right? He's just at the beginning of it, and this should be a good camp for him. I'm hoping to see some exciting things from him, and I know for some reason Greg has him listed as a forward, which is always head scratching
Whatever.
for me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, who knows? I mean, that doesn't always mean anything, but sometimes you just I don't know, but yeah, he's another one of those players I think that has an opportunity to go shine in an Olympics and then be a player that's on the fringes. Player out of form, player not fully fit. He gets his opportunity. Who knows what he
Hmm.
can make of it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where a guy like Duncan McGuire maybe can also fill that spot. He is obviously a little bit older than Luna, but still Olympic eligible. Came onto the scene this year, scoring double-digit goals for Orlando. A decent team in MLS. I don't think he's anywhere close to the top of our striker depth chart. I don't even know if I would put him in the top 7 of our strikers, but being that he is on the younger end and he had a very good year this year, it is good to have a look at him and see what he can bring, hopefully in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he's definitely earned that for sure for this camp. I mean, I don't, um, you have. I mean, you have to give some of these guys a chance. I mean, he had again because you have to get looks at them. That's the problem, right? There's limited time to get looks at these players. You've got to do that. And you got to make the most of it. So I think, I would expect him to start at striker.
Yeah,
In
he,
a couple weeks.
he and Kamunga are going to be starting for that or fighting for that starting striker role. I think Kamunga more versatile, but McGuire feels to me a lot like a Brandon Vasquez type striker, where he's most effective getting onto the end of crosses and balls into the box. But who else is like that? Balogun. So it's not like that's saying he's a limited striker. It's just I would like to see him develop, but I also feel like again this camp is a great time for him to come in, for the coaching staff to not only see what he has to offer, but also for him to see what he needs to improve upon to hopefully take his game to the next level. Maybe not too much because he is playing for Orlando, so I personally don't want to see him take his game too much to the next level, but he can play well and then go to Europe and then become a star.
Right, and that's the thing. Like and I don't know how much of this happens with the federation. My understanding it doesn't happen very much, but like the guidance, there's got to be a little guidance from U.S. Soccer and the coaches and the federation say, hey, look, we see a lot from you. We'd like to to push yourself, right? Like
Yeah,
I would imagine those conversations have happened,
I
and
think
so
Greg has a good track record of talking about that. I don't know about this camp specifically, but I know that we've had conversations with other players that I've heard them talk, saying that Greg does do that. Now, sometimes you listen to what Greg has to say, and sometimes it feels a little weird, but I don't know if that's been something that has been top down or if that's just a Greg thing talking to players that he seems to like.
yeah, I mean, it's just in general, it's just that guidance, that leadership,
Yeah.
of again the small window of time you have these players, you have to,
Mm-hmm.
kind of, develop those relationships and that trust, right? The trust behind it, um, because that's part of being a manager, a coach, whatever it is, to be able to have your players trust you that you're looking out
Um,
the best for them.
yeah, let's yell about players. How about that? We've been nice. Let's actually get angry for a second because that's what people want to hear. Um, any inclusions for you that just like you're scratching your head, you don't know what we're doing here. Why did this player get called up?
Yeah, look, the easy one here, 4 right backs at a World Cup has got to be Shaq Moore. Like I mean, I get why he's probably here, but like for Greg to say he's going to be a player
Greg
that,
name dropping him specifically
yeah,
competing for that, and I'm like, what?
I mean, we have not. Shaq Moore is what he is. I mean, I think he's a player that's hanging on. I mean, frankly surprised Zimmerman is in this camp. Um, but
I think
you
he's
look at,
still recovering from injury, but yeah,
is he okay? Well, so, but like you look at Shaq
pretty
Moore,
sure
he
that's
does.
what Greg said when he was
I
asked
mean,
about it.
Dewan Jones is, way ahead of him, in my opinion. I think, and obviously he plays different side of the field, but John Tolkien's ahead of him, in terms of like that sort of thing. I just, you might have needed a roster spot, fine, but to name drop him was, to me,
Yeah,
more than head scratching.
yeah, I think that was what the concern and where the alarm bells went off for a lot of people and stirred up a lot of trouble on Twitter was name dropping him as someone who could be in that conversation to replace Dest at the Nations League finals. Before we get too much into that, because I do want to mention that Greg mentioned only that they'll need to do that for one game. So all the conversations we had about what other punishment Dust might get, it seems like Greg has made up his mind. It's only, hey, he gets suspended for one game and we move on, which is fine. Whatever. That's an internal player thing, not a us thing. But it was interesting that Shaq was mentioned as that, because I'm with you. It's like, okay, well, to me, the direct backup is Joe Scally. And then after that, you have Brian Reynolds. And then you have DeJuan Jones. You have Tim Weah. You have other, I would rather see Tim Weah at right back than Shaq Moore, to be quite honest. And that's where I just don't get why he feels the need to bring him in and then specifically say, oh, well, you're competing for a spot at Copa or at Nations League, when I just don't see him being anywhere close to our depth chart. Now, granted, he might be 5th on the depth chart, but it's just like, we don't need to bring that many right backs into a camp for 2 games,
Yeah, it's a little bit, again, I don't know. I mean, this is where I think sometimes Greg can't let go with some of these players. That, you know what I mean? They've earned a lot of stock with Greg. They've, and it's just, there's something he just can't let go. We've seen him let go of quite a few players, and again, I'm not concerned with this camp, even what he said, whatever.
Totally,
but again, if we see him start to reappear in camps here, or heading into the Copa America, that's concerning to me, because you have much better depth. Again, best case, he's 5th on that depth chart.
I guess the silver lining is DeAndre Yedlin wasn't called up, but
that's true.
Yeah. The person that I am also scratching my head at from just the okay, why, is Jackson Reagan. Greg talked about him being a good ball playing center back for Seattle, but I just don't understand the need to bring in a guy who is 25 years old, hasn't gotten a look from the national team before, never. I mean, I don't think I would point to Jackson Reagan as someone who stood out during the MLS season outside of Greg clearly looking at it and go, oh, well, you can pass the ball well. I just, okay, fine. He's a starter for Seattle. Great.
Yeah, I think it's a lack of center back options. I mean, there's just not a lot available in the MLS of any age and quality. I think that goes for I think it also goes for what's his name? I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Nikos Terafan.
Oh, Nikosi Tafari.
Yeah, Tafari.
Yeah,
so
similar.
I think it's the same thing, right? I think it's just a lack of options. Oh, they're center back, they're American. Okay, we'll call them in. They just don't have the depth, right now there, which is again why, I mentioned bringing in, a Winder, to camp.
Yeah.
In replacing.
I guess it could be worse than bringing in Justin Glad, who has proven that he's not up to the challenge. So maybe this is well, let's try someone else. But I don't know. I mean, I think you mentioned offline, Miazga. Why not just call him in? Because he's closer to that than any of.
Well, right. I mean, I think Miazga, as stupid as he is, and runs his mouth and assault referees verbally and whatever. But he's
on a good day.
I think he's closer to the national team than either of these players, right? In general. So I mean, again, Greg wants to get a look at the player. That's the piece of it. I don't have a better option to call in. That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the wrong.
And that's a legitimate issue that you're going to run into this camp, and that's why I'm not going to get super worked up about it unless it becomes a why is he still here again, but he's not actually getting played. A little bit of the Christian Roldan thing where it's okay, you're in every camp, but you're not actually playing. And when you do play, you're terrible. So yeah, the last one that I really want to just I don't get is Brian White. And I say this because he scores goals in MLS. I'm not going to take that away. But at this point, he is 27. He's 5'10". And I'm looking at him going, he's not even my preferred striker in this particular camp, he's nowhere close to anywhere of the top 10 in U.S. striker depth chart, for my opinion. I mean, we got Balogun, Pepe, Sargent, Haji Wright scoring. You still got PFOC. You've got DK who's back playing. I mean, like there's a group of players who are decidedly better than Brian White, who are playing at much higher levels than Brian White, and who are much younger than Brian White. But I guess the criteria is you had a good MLS season, so here you go. But like, this is just, you had 25 players. Did you have to bring in Brian White as your striker? No, I don't think you did.
Yeah, again, I think it's just a matter. I mean, look, I think that this one here is probably a good example of, hey, need an extra player, striker that had a good MLS season. Let's reward the player, right? I mean, I think that's
I
it. I think
guess.
because I mean, because I don't see a role for this player in the national team. I mean, they're just they're not even on the chart, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you mentioned with center backs, I get that we're trying to get guys in. Ian Murphy is a good call up. Where even though he's not a national team player, I think at the age of 23, you're looking at him like, oh, you just started almost every game for the Supporters Shield winner. That's to me a worthwhile investment of young enough guy at a position where hopefully center backs are hard to, similar to goalkeepers, center backs are hard to be international caliber at a young age because a lot of what you have to do as a center back is experience and leadership, and it's hard for a kid under the age of 25 to truly like possess. But it for Brian White again, it's just I don't fully understand even the goal of bringing him in, even with we needed a striker. Well, you could have called up Jesus Ferreira. I mean, like he's not on this camp. Why not just call him up?
Well, right. I think he's again a great example of like another player that I would we've seen him, but I would be better with seeing him than Brian White, right? Like
Ferreira to
never,
me is similar to Miles Robinson. Miles is higher up on the depth chart, but like you're definitely part of the national team pool. So bringing you in for this camp to me is more about fitness and just being there. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, that's one. It's a little bit of a head scratcher to me for Greg is that Jesus Ferreira one. Like it's almost like he's trying too hard to like get rid of some of the older guys because he's not that old. Was he 22? I mean,
I'm pretty sure he's still Olympic eligible. He might be just over
right.
that age limit.
But you know what I mean? Like, he's a example of even if he was a little overaged, to be that overaged player, right? Like to me, that's where like you can't.
Yeah, he is 23. He turned 23 last month. So he
Okay,
is literally a month too
he
old.
just missed it. So,
Yeah.
but again, he's one of those players where in the Olympic environment, I think maybe he could actually, excel a little bit, right? Like,
Yeah.
maybe find his opportunities, and that's the thing. Like, he's got to push himself as a player too. I think that's evident. He's too comfortable in the MLS.
Mm,
I don't know if he honest if he moves or not, but I think he's one of those players that maybe that's part of it. Maybe Greg's like, look, you
yeah.
guys got to push yourself because
Yeah.
we know what it. We've seen you in camps. We've seen you in matches that matter,
Yeah.
and you either performed or you haven't. So
I mean, look, I'm all for bringing in a top goal scorer in your domestic league. In terms of like, that's just a role that you kind of have reserved as a guy who's scoring a lot and maybe not a top league because obviously MLS isn't. But, I think that's why Haji Wright got called up for the World Cup is like, hey, the dude scored a bunch of goals. We can't not bring him up. Same with PFOC when he was scoring a bunch in the Swiss league. It's like, you can't not bring up a striker who's scoring a bunch of goals. I mean, how many times have we seen that in the US? I mean, pool. That's happened so many times because you just have to. But there does come a point where you go, okay, well, what's the value here? And some of these guys you just don't understand. But at the same time, I think there are valuable players who were called up. I mentioned 12 Olympic eligible. That's great because as you and I have talked about, I don't know how many times on this particular show and how many times we've had this conversation on Twitter, the Olympics are not a FIFA tournament. You do not have to release players. Clubs may choose to hold players back, especially if you're looking at MLS teams where they're going to be playing Leagues Cup at that point. You know, other clubs across Europe might be in preseason, but they might prefer to keep that player for preseason. Having a large pool for the U23 squad is good.
Yeah, it is, and they need it, and so that's gonna be I think that's gonna be the difference between a successful Olympics and not one, right?
Yeah.
If you get the right combination of players available, you don't need all the best ones, but you need a combination that's going to be able to put a quality team and an exciting team on the field, in France, because I think if you can't do that, I don't even know if the Olympics matters. You know what I mean? From that perspective, you've got to be able to do that, because that has to be FIFA needs to get better, because that really has to be a stepping stone. I don't know why the women's rules are different than the men's rules. Like, it doesn't really matter.
I could go on
You,
a rant about that in its own, but yeah.
You know what I mean? But like to me, like you've got to be able to use that as another international tournament to propel the game. I don't know why FIFA doesn't embrace it more or at all, frankly. I mean, but
I would love for them to treat it as a legitimate tournament, but it is still capped at the U23 level, because I think that I understand clubs aren't going to fully play ball if you say, hey, you have to release players for 2 major international tournaments back-to-back summers. That's not going to happen. But making it a little bit more mandatory would be nice, because I still think that this is a valuable tournament for those teams. Now on the women's side, I would love to also have give me 16 teams and cap it at the 23 age, because I think at this point women's football has surpassed the level where the Olympics was also. We needed the Olympics to just remind people that the sport existed,
Right.
And the players who are, I think about the U.S. women who are going to be there, thinking about, even if you were talking about a U23 tournament like a Trinity Rodman, or Mia Fischel. Well, Fischel is probably not the best example. Rodman or Shaw, maybe 2 good examples right now. Well, they're going to be in season. You look at Fischel or any of the, you look at some of the European players, they're going to be in preseason. Luckily for the women's leagues, they tend to start later in the calendar, but still, it would make sense to keep both tournaments both big, but let's not put more miles on legs when we don't need to. Let's tackle some questions.
It definitely needs a little bit of a tweak.
Yeah, let's tackle some questions that we got from Twitter. Thanks to everyone who responded. You can, again, follow the show at Soccer for Us Pod, and you can follow Thomas at US Keeper. So a couple of questions. The first one, and I think we talked a little bit about this, but US Soccer's Bot asked, what are our top 3 favorite players on this January squad? Do you have 3 players that you're super excited to watch on this team?
Yeah, I would say Diego Luna is definitely one I'm excited to see. I mentioned Jack McGlynn. He's another one. I'm trying to. There's a couple other ones that that are that we there's a couple we haven't seen, but like Wiley, Tolkien. Those are 2 that players that are close. Aiden Morris, I kind of like to see again. Tillman, I'm excited to see because we haven't seen him yet, right?
Yeah.
He made the transfer over. He got injured in one of these camps and didn't get in. So I guess I'm kind of excited to see him too. But as far as the younger players go, Luna,
yeah,
Jack McGlynn and Wiley and Token, I think are kind of tops there. Players that are getting ready to make a move, I think, to better competition.
Yeah, obviously, I'm excited to see Caleb Wiley, the Atlanta homegrown. I really would. I don't think it'll happen, so this is why I'm not going to truly include him. But Patrick Schulte, because I think if you're talking about the guy who started and won MLS Cup, who's also Olympic eligible, that seems to be a great opportunity for both him and this camp. But I don't know if that'll happen, so I won't truly include him. But I'll say Caleb is one. Duncan McGuire, because I would like to see how what he did in MLS translates to international play. Not that it's a whole big test, but I'd like to see it. And then I'm going to shout out St. Louis City, because I think AZ Jackson is one that I don't think he had quite the chance because this is one of those things where you get an expansion team, you get a player, kind of local kid, come up with it. That could be a fun one just to kind of watch as a midfielder, see what he can provide. Because I think the midfield core, as we talked about, the midfield group here can be really exciting because they're young, they might be Olympic eligible, they're playing well for their teams in MLS. So that's why I'll say Wiley, McGuire, and Jackson. Next question from Five Takes on the Five Stripes. Does it feel like we're sort of lacking, I think they're called tactics? Seriously, though, if we don't perform well in Copa America, do you think we will make a coaching change in the summer? Well, if you listened to our last episode, you would have heard that Caleb predicted that. But I do think, I think the question is, what does perform well mean? Because I think U.S. Soccer won't want to fire Greg for a number of reasons. But, I mean, I think failure would be a reason to fire him. I think there's a difference between not performing well and failing.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to get out of the group for Copa. But again,
yeah, if he doesn't make it out of the group, you're gone. Like that's the
I mean, there can't. I mean, you can't. It's not acceptable, right? Like you have such small opportunities. They've got to play matches in this Copa America. They've got to play against top tier teams. So you've got to get out of the group. There's no reason you can't, right?
Right.
It's very doable. You've got a team you've seen.
We can talk about Uruguay being a tough team. The other two are not.
Right.
You should beat Panama with your A squad. You should beat Bolivia.
Right. Right. Exactly. So if you can't do that, then there's bigger issues. But it's how, in my opinion, it's how you perform. Right. If they lose 2-1 to Uruguay in a well played match, I'm not going to like that they lost, but geez, I'm going to say, wow, they held their own, right? Like they held their own. They had their chances. They just didn't
if it
fall,
plays
right?
out, think about the Netherlands match, right? I know people I thought we played pretty well in that Netherlands match outside of a couple of moments. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, Netherlands a better team. So, okay, maybe you don't beat Uruguay, maybe you draw Uruguay, whatever. But you go to the knockout, you're playing Brazil or Colombia, who, while Colombia may not be ranked higher than us, I think most people would view them as a better team. Brazil definitely ranked higher than us. And though I think we can beat Brazil, that would still take a monumental effort to do so. So, yeah, it would be tough to say, oh, well, you lost in, the quarterfinals, you're done,
Yeah, I think it all depends how it looks, right? I mean, and the thing about the Netherlands game was is that the U.S. had to grind out that last game. They're gassed. They're gassed going into that Netherlands game, right? They weren't running on anything. So I don't think they're going to be in a situation. Hopefully, not in a situation against Uruguay where that's the case, right? So you can play a little more free flowing. You don't have to be able to, you're not, bunkering in for 60 minutes of the match trying to hold on to a 1-goal lead, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the place how it is, and to this tactics question, no, they don't have tactics. We haven't seen anything from Greg that indicates anything different quite yet. We've seen more from BJ Callahan, teams than we have from Greg's teams, right? Greg's kind of stuck that piece of it. Now, I'm going to be open-minded based on their, the new hire of assistant coach, that's supposed to, as from coming over from Switzerland, just to hopefully see some of that translate in March, right? We've got to see some of that in March. You've got to try some of that in March. I don't know. They'll probably have 2 friendlies before Copa America. They'll have a chance to try stuff out with. I imagine there's an international one before Copa America, so they'll have at least 2 matches where they can get friendlies, hopefully with other, teams, in the Copa America. I'm assuming. So having that opportunity to try out different formations, different tactics, to be able to play your opponent, figure out a strategy for that opponent, right? You can't always play the way you want to play. You can do that against a Bolivia or a Panama, right? You can't do that against a Brazil or a
point. That is the point right there, Thomas, because we're done building the philosophy and the ethics and the groundwork and the value. We're done with the building, right? The foundation should be there. So now, to your point, we need to see a slightly different game plan. I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're not that type of team. Greg's not that type of coach. But have a slightly different approach against Uruguay than you do Bolivia, or against Brazil than you would even Uruguay. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah, I mean,
Uruguay is a different team than Brazil, so you cannot play it the same way.
right? They're both they're top tier international teams, but they're again they operate differently. They're their style of play is differently. So the well, I continue giving Greg credit for this, and he had a long time leading up to it. They were prepared for those three group stage matches at the World Cup. They were
They
absolutely
were.
prepared for that. They had plans for each of them, and I'll I'll firmly give that major credit because they did a great
That
job. That
England match was a great coaching preparation job by Greg. I fully agree. I think the Wales match, unfortunately, the penalty that Walker gave up sucked. But the Iran match too, we could have ended up 2-0 at halftime. Wales
oh
on
yeah,
off by what, half a inch maybe.
yeah.
I mean, it was off, but it's just like okay, well, if that is just half a second somehow different, So I'm with you.
Well,
I need to see it again.
yeah, and what I think where he has to be better is he's got to look at other Group D and say, okay, we have to do this. We have to scout that Group D like we're
Yes,
scouting our group
yes.
because you have to be
And
ready
which he
for.
mentioned, by the way, in his press conference. So I will
Oh,
give
did
him
he?
credit. He mentioned talking about other groups and how they're doing that now.
Okay.
Obviously, it's a little bit easier now that you have 6 months to look at it, and you do know the groups pretty well. I mean, and let's be real honest, we can kind of bet this is going to be Colombia and Brazil. It's a tough group, but it's tough just because Colombia and Brazil are going to battle against each other.
Right.
I don't
But
think. I think Canada's going to be in that group if I remember correctly. So I don't. That won't be a problem.
right. So, but preparing for that is important, and so that's that next stage, right? Being ready for that Netherlands, right? Being ready for that,
Right.
in general. So I think that is what we need to see more of that pre-planning game plan sort of
Hmm.
thing and breaking down your opponent. And frankly, finding out the lineups, we talk about tactics a lot, but like the tactics are going to change based on who's on the field. You cannot run out what everyone wants to be their best 11, whatever that is, in every match of
Well,
the Copa
no, and
America
this
and the World
is
Cup, and that's I mean, you can't do that. You've got to rest players. You've got to balance
yeah,
it, and you've got to properly set the tactics because you might not need to use a double pivot for a match, or you might want to use it for a match, right? Or maybe
right,
three backs, three center backs, and
right.
so
This
you
is
you
where that midfield question always comes into play, and I think Caleb talks about this well. Is okay, we have 4 to 5 midfielders we can play. It depends on the opponent. It depends whether you're playing that double pivot, whether you're playing two attacking. You're right. It depends, and that's going to dictate who's starting. And you know that's what you should have is a coach that can adapt,
right.
and a team that can adapt as well. And that's the other thing is the team needs to have that on them.
Yeah, and understanding
Let's
their roles in those pieces. So we'll see.
exactly. Exactly. Last question. This one comes from Forward Attack. How would you rank this USMNT January camp against recent ones under Greg Berhalter? And I think we talked a lot about this at the top, but 2020 seemed to be kind of that ideal camp where you had a lot of young players. Um, you had a lot of experienced players as well, and that's fine. You can have the MLS USMNT veterans. Like that's fine. You're going to have MLS guys who are part of that USMNT senior national team pool that we kind of would say maybe the group of 30 you would definitely call in. You're looking at, and that's fine. But I think that 2020 group was probably the best one because of the way that it was structured and the way it prioritized finding younger talents who were still also playing in Europe at that time.
Well, let me throw one out you here, though. I mean, the last year, I know Greg wasn't the manager last year, so technically it doesn't count. But let me throw the 2021, some of the names on that. Now, mind you, that was an all MLS camp. No, any NRS players. That 2020 did have 3 players from Europe. I think there was Giannis Kappas and McKinney, maybe. I don't know. Vines. I don't know. There was 3 on that one in general. But the 2021 had Turner, Julian Araujo, Sam Vines, Pereira's, Bello, DK, and Tessman. So like, some of those players are,
Yeah.
I mean, Araujo's not with us anymore. He's got to Mexico, but some of those, DK is coming back from injury. I mean, those are some of the exciting ones too. But again, we're looking back, so like, it's a little harder. I mean, I liked last year's one. They had Paxton Aronson. We had, John Tolkien, who we hadn't seen Zendejas, Sonora, Williamson, Cowell, Aiden Morris,
Hmm.
Jalen Neal, Gaga was on that. Solentano was on that roster. Like you had some, some just a good balance of players on that were, that have been part of the mix. Or, Jonathan Gomez was a part of that team too, right?
And that's what I want
Well,
to talk about also. I think last year is a good one to bring up. And no, this wasn't Greg, but it's hard for me to imagine Greg didn't have some sort of plan on this because, they were probably
oh,
talking
yeah,
about this before this happened. But yeah, I mean, look, you mentioned Gomez, Jonathan Gomez, also a guy like Jalen Neal, Sam Rogers, John Tolkien. So Sam Rogers was one of those. There are a couple of like those dual nationals. So Gomez, Rogers, Sonora, and even Sendejas. That it was like, oh, this is good to get them in because they can. So why not? Rogers, I don't think turned out to be anything. I think we've passed on Sonora finally, and I think Zendejas is just there because who else is going to play that position if we really need him to? But that is a worthwhile use of this camp too.
yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, I, I guess it's kind of to be determined on that. I think
Sure,
there's
yeah.
a
I
couple
mean,
ones in
look,
there.
one of these players, I can be completely wrong. Jackson Reagan could end up being the dude who becomes your fifth center back because it's like, well, if you don't, we got to move on from Tim Ream, and oh crap, Chris Richards is hurt. Jackson Reagan, you're the dude. Or
You're
he could
right.
become a Miles Robinson. I don't know. I just don't see it.
Well, Matt Bezo is always one that gets mentioned as a guy who came
Sure,
into this
yeah.
camp and wasn't, and then he's a major contributor
Yeah.
in that cycle, right? At that point, so you just don't know, because you look back again. It's always you're always looking back on it, and saying, well, these are the players that are now performing, or exciting at the time. It's a challenge. I mean, I said I don't love the roster, but I don't hate the roster. So it's kind of what I expect for these January camp rosters, honestly.
Well, let's summarize it and finish up here. And I think this is always a thought experiment that goes around on this particular time of year when we have this camp. Understanding that there are some parameters of calling players up, and it's literally just some people are in season and some aren't. Assuming that the clubs would release players and players want to come who aren't in season. So that's obviously the MLS players as well as some others. There's a lot of the Scandinavian countries who aren't playing right now either. What would your ideal use for Camp Cupcake be?
I think it kind of said at the top. I think you have to look at each year and see what is going on in that year. So this year is an Olympic year, right? They're qualified, they're in there. So I think you bring in, I think you want to bring in, as the best you can, kind of a U23 roster, players that you could potentially have an opportunity to play in that Olympics. The next window, maybe it's different. Maybe you have players that are looking to get transferred or whatever it is. And you need to do that. I think you have to kind of you have to flex it a little bit here and there, because the federation has to balance a little things too, right? They're smart. They're playing this match, in a USL stadium. So they're getting a little bit more creative with that, I think. And you have to look at, like, how am I going to pull different, get the eyes on this, right? Make it somewhat exciting, because you can't bring
Mhm.
in a bunch of no-name people, because that's not helpful either, right? Because I said none of these matches are particularly good. So I mean,
No.
it's going to be 1-0, 1-1. Typically they're just not exciting matches in general. So you have to create a proper expectation for this camp, and ideally, I think you just have to start looking at some of these younger players a little bit more, and
Hmm.
not making it, I mean, if you wanted to, if there were a case where you had a player that you'd want to kind of say, a farewell game, maybe you make that, and the men
Sure.
don't do that as often as
Yeah,
the
we need an
women's
Aaron
teams.
Long farewell game.
Nah, not an Aaron Long. Maybe a Mike. Maybe you could do a Michael Bradley one. That was probably the only one that
uh,
could. But like, it's hard. I really have to kind of like look at a little bit more in detail, in depth on
yeah,
that. But like, because there's really nothing going on at this time of year in general, right? So I think again, it all depends on the year. We see some
yeah,
years where they bring in players from Europe that need a break from their camp. Dest is a player that came over last year.
yeah.
Look at him now. He's doing well with his club. He got an opportunity. He got a little bit more I don't know, positivity in his situation, and he kind of turned it around there, from a club perspective. So it's yeah, because I don't know the true history behind it. I think there's a couple articles out there, but
We were
him,
discussing this week to try to figure out what,
yeah, I don't know
because
the
it kind of
specific.
started as a pre-Gold Cup camp because the Gold Cup used to be in February, but it's
Correct.
definitely shifted from that.
Right, the Gold Cup and the U.S. Cup were tournaments played early in their year, and so they were starting in '96. I think it was the Gold Cup year, maybe. They had the pre-tournaments, and then since then they built up to having that camp before the tournament, and then it just kind of became, because then the calendar changed a little bit internationally, and then it just kind of evolved in the early 2000s into a regular, you know uh, just a regular MLS type of camp where they would hold that. But again, back then they had some, Donovan was always at the camp, and and so
Yeah.
you had, but again they had the Gold Cup for. I know they had an '02 in January before the
I want to say '02 is the final time that they did it in January, if I
yeah.
remember correctly. Um, I think the Donovan point is a great example, and I mentioned it. I think there's value of bringing the kind of locked in USMNT pool players who are MLS or even Liga MX or sometimes even Scandinavian based. If you're out of season, truly out of season, but you're still one of those top 30 players, maybe top 40, then I would like to have you in this camp because I think there's value of getting you together, training, fitness, all that kind of stuff. But if you're not, and if you're over the age of 23, then I don't really think I want you to get a debut in this camp. Is that fair? I want this to be focused on youth because most every year has some sort of youth tournament or getting just the core USMNTers together to train and be together. And I think that would be how I would say it. I also love the idea of using this as a chance to kind of take the team to different spots in the country. I love that they're playing not just in San Antonio, but in the USL stadium there. As we have stadiums being built across the country at that level, I would love to see more of it. I would love to see maybe once Jacksonville gets theirs completed, we do it there. Louisville, New Mexico. I don't know if you want to go to Louisville or Indianapolis, maybe in January, but you know what I'm saying? Like, let's see this be that because you're not going to sell out a 25 to 30 to 50,000 seat stadium for this, type of a match. So why not put it in San Antonio where they haven't seen a U.S. team play in forever? It's a 7,000, 8,000 seat stadium. Tickets sold out very quickly. The only tickets available now are literally jacked up prices on resale tickets. All the actual tickets have been sold. I think that is a better way to use this camp is just to create exposure,
Yeah, yeah.
utilize some of the, go get young USL talents who haven't had a chance to truly show. Get the young MLS talents who had a really good season, and then supplement that with some of the USMNT stalwarts who are still domestic.
Yeah, I mean that model would work. I mean, I think you create the demand with a small stadium. You throw a couple stars in there that have been part of the team and that are still part of the team, and then you throw in some young MLS USL talent, and get a decent opponent,
Yeah.
to have an exciting match. I mean, I'd
Well,
like
maybe it's
I
also not a bad opponent. I mean, Greg talked about it a lot. They're in the same boat where they've qualified for Euros. So these guys who are here, they're domestic players, but they're domestic players again with the U.S. Same with the U.S. It's like their domestic league still is going to fill a lot of the holes on their roster. These are guys fighting to play at Euro. In theory, this camp is the guys fighting to go play at the Olympics or at Copa America.
Yeah, and this is a hard window to schedule matches in. I will say that US is it's not a CONCACAF team. It's
Yeah.
and so that's usually they can get some of these European teams um, in the mix for this January camp for
Yeah.
the friendlies, which is good. So
Well, Thomas, thank you for opining about the Camp Cupcake. We went a long time talking about a kind of meaningless and nothing roster and friendly, but I think we covered some good topics while we were here. Any last thoughts or anything you need to plug as before we get away?
no, nothing plugging now. I think I plugged on the last just when I had written a venues article on chasing a cup. Working on a couple other pieces right now, but nothing close to providing. So I'm excited to see, to get some feedback from camp, get some pictures, get some videos from US Soccer about what's going on, and hopefully we can get an exciting match with a bunch of goals and see some of these new stars break out.
Well, I think we don't quite cross off one of those stadiums and locations on your list, but definitely going back to San Antonio, a place where we haven't been in a while, and a stadium that's definitely new. So I will shout you out again on that article. It's good to see, and I think you and I both agree this is a positive step for U.S. Soccer. Don't forget, you can follow Thomas on Twitter at USKeeper. Follow me at Soccer for Us Pod. Support the show at buymeacoffee.com/soccer for us pod. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm Bart. I'm out.